All right. Check, make sure we're all online. So we are live. Okay. Very good. Good to see everybody. So tonight we are going to, or this morning, depending where you are, we're going to talk about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, whose appearance day it is today. And this morning we heard about him. Last night I gave the Sunday Feast lecture about him. So we're going to do something a little bit different than just talk about his biography. We're going to talk more about his teachings and his desire to spread Krishna consciousness and his inventive spirit in presenting Krishna consciousness. His dedication to something called Yukta Vairagya, being willing to use everything to spread Krishna consciousness, particularly all the modern conveniences, which at that time would not be considered so modern by us today. But anyway, they were modern then. So first, we're going to chant Ohe Vaishnava Thakur in honor of his appearance. And so we'll get the guitar out. Okay. And you can listen. I think we got everything here. Yeah. Ohe Vaishnava Thakur Doyar Sagare Say Karuna Kori Diyapada Chaya Jona He Amaya Tumaracharana Jaya Begadami Joya Dosha Shori Jaya Guna De Adase Jaya Sat Sangha Deo Amare Boshachi Sangera Ekake Amara Not Poi Bolo Harinama Sankirtane Tumi Kripa Kori Shanta Bendadia Deya Krishna Krishna say tomorrow, Krishna tite paro, tomara chikate hache. Amito Kangala, Krishna Krishna Boli, Daitava Bache. Vaishnava Thakur Yara Sagare Say Karuna Kori Diyapatachaya Domare Joda He Maya Tomara Charana Re Ati Krishna 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 Re Hare Amare Rama 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 Ati Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Jaya Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Haribo 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 Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravidikacharya all Stutela Shimad His Divine Grace Abhaya Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidwaita Gadadha Shivasani Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopa Gopinath Sai Mukunda Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Maturanam Ki Jai Jagannath Swami Ki Jai Yamunamai Ki Jai Srimati Lasi Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bo. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glory is the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bo. Jai Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharani Nivashesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dejatarne Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, just got to get set up here. So, of course, as we mentioned before, today is the glorious appearance day of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the great Acharya, who is known. I just go. Give me a second to get this set up with my notes here. All right, that's definitely not going to work. Whoops. Oh, somehow or other, I have WhatsApp on the screen at the same time. That's why things aren't working. Give me a second. There we go. So, okay, sounds good. Okay, and that should work. Nope, doesn't work. Okay. Just give me one little second. Everything here is just... Hey, that seems to be working. Let me just try one more thing. And if this hasn't worked, then that should... Okay. There we go. Okay. So, anyway, so Om Ganati Mirandasha Gananjana Shlakaya Chakshur Unmeditam Yena Tasmai Shigurvena Maha. I offer my respectful obeisances, humble obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual masters, divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Opened my eyes with a torchlight of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. As I mentioned before, today is the glorious appearance day of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was sometimes called Nrsimha Guru. Was also the right-hand man of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, of course, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his father prayed for Lord Chaitanya's right-hand man to accomplish something that Bhaktivinoda Thakur thought that he personally couldn't do, so he prayed for Lord Chaitanya's right-hand man to do that, and that was Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who was known previously as Bimal Prasad. Because the prasadam from Lord Jagannath, after it's offered to Lord Jagannath, is brought to the deity Bimal, who is like Yogamaya, sometimes considered Durga, and then also given to Lord Shiva. And that involves this whole story in the Chaitanya Mangal, which we don't have time to tell right now. But in any case, we're just going to speak very briefly about his history and then get more into some quotations about him and descriptions about him. Because this morning we spoke about his history, when he was born, 1874, with a bromedical thread around him, which was actually the umbilical cord. He was displayed his firm determination by taking a vow, even at 7 years of age, 2 to 3 years of age, that he would never eat a mango again his whole life, and he never ate a mango his whole life. And the reason he took that vow is because he ate a boga mango, when he was very young. And 7 years old, he got a Kurma deity and a Kurma mantra to worship. The Kurma deity is the presiding deity of the ocean of the nectarian devotional service, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as Rupa Goswami's book is called. At 7 years of age, he memorized the Gita. 11 years, he was touring around India with Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He always had a photographic memory. He left his university years, just going very quickly. I'm not going to be very elaborate in this. If you're interested in more elaborate descriptions, then you can listen to my class that was given last night during the Sunday feast, in which I went into more details about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. In a very determined way, he accepted initiation from Gorkashodas Babaji Maharaj, who had vowed basically not to accept any disciples, but Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur was determined to become the disciple of Srila Gorkashodas Babaji Maharaj. And he established certain things that I didn't mention last night. He established the printing presses, which he considered to be the Brihat Mridanga. He took sannyas following the Ramanujacharya rites rather than the Gaudiya rites, because he was interested in Yukta Vairagya, using everything for preaching Krishna consciousness. He condemned people who use the deity to collect money or do business with. In fact, he's the author of that famous quote of someone who is using the Shalagram Shila to crack nuts with. He established a beautiful temple in Sridham Mayapur in a place called Brajapatan, in which he installed deities of the acharyas of the four sampradayas. He established the circumambulation of Navadvip, the Navadvip Parikrama, and he sent sannyasis out all over India, established 108 Padatirthas, that is where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visited during Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, and he sent his disciples to the west. But of course, his most prominent disciple, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, went to the west after Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur left this world, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left this world in 1936, actually 1937 on January 1st, but he was getting ready to leave this world in 1936. So on January 1st, he actually left this world. He established 64 temples all over India, printing presses, exhibits portraying the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, a lot of writing, and his English was so elevated that even English-speaking people like me have to read the dictionary to understand what he was saying. Actually, even Prabhupada said something like that. Prabhupada said it was very difficult to understand the English of his spiritual master. So, anyway, let us talk about, let's read actually some quotes that describe his qualities. As I mentioned before, he was called the Shinga Guru because he wouldn't put up with any sort of nonsense, especially in regard to improper philosophy like Mayavad philosophy or impersonalism. I told the story last night that he would sometimes grab Mayavadis. Mayavadis are those who think that everything is illusion, or that they can become one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or they may think both things. And so he used to grab the Mayavadis literally, physically, by their shirt and said, "Why are you wearing a shirt? Just wear a piece of cotton." A shirt and a piece of cotton are exactly the same. And of course, in one sense, the shirt and a piece of cotton are exactly the same, but they are, in one sense, they are the same. Cotton is cotton is cotton is cotton. But cotton of a certain shape serves a particular function, whereas cotton without a shape doesn't serve much of a function, except it's the raw materials for making something. Okay, so let us talk about different stories, and I will read some excerpts from his biography. He himself was the enemy of falsehood, and people who were thriving on falsehood sometimes became his enemy. There were many incidents. Once, when he and his party were performing Navadvip Parikrama, the caste Brahmins hired gundas, or thugs, who let loose with a volley of stones and boulders on the party. They were really aiming to take Srila Saraswati Thakur's life. Actually, there were many attempts on his life and other occasions as well. But one of his disciples, whose name was Keshava Maharaj, cleverly exchanged his white dress for Saraswati Thakur's saffron, so Saraswati Thakur emerged disguised and escaped, but it was a terrible scene. It looked like a massacre, with the streets of Navadvip stained with the blood of the Vaishnavas. Some devotees suffered severe gashes and fractures, but by Krishna's grace, none was killed. So this is interesting. So why would they stone all these devotees on Parikrama? Well, the reason is, and actually they closed the temples to would let the devotees in. The reason is that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was a reformer. Because in many cases previously, not in the pure Vaishnava Sampradaya, but in general, many cases there was caste distinction. Caste distinction means that if you were a Brahmin, you certainly couldn't associate with lower class people. And you could only be a Brahmin if you were born in a Brahmin family. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur accepted devotees of all caste, births, so to speak, and he engaged them in pure devotional service. And he not only accepted them, but he gave some of them the second initiation, which is Gayatri Mantra, and he gave some of them sannyas. I mean, that was unheard of in India. That someone coming from a non-Brahminical family, or even a lower, like Vaishya family, would be given the order of sannyas. And our spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was criticized for giving Westerners sannyas. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave Brahminical initiation and sannyas to those who were considered to have been born in a lower caste. And so the Brahmanas, they got very upset. Why would they get upset? because they wanted a monopoly. Monopoly means they would have an exclusive right to be brahmanas. Now, why should they want an exclusive right to be brahmanas? Well, it's very good for business. If you have a monopoly, you can raise your prices. If you have an open market and many suppliers of a particular product, the price will go down. So if you needed someone to, Brahman means you needed someone to do what? A marriage, a funeral, a name-giving ceremony. Practically all the samskaras were done by brahmanas. So if anybody could become a brahmin by the proper samskara, which is actually the statement in the Vedic literatures, Janmana jayate shudra samskara bhavet dvijam. By birth, everyone is a shudra, no matter what type of family you're born in. But by the proper samskara, you can actually become a brahmin. And also the statement, aho bataswa pachato gariyan yadri vagre vartate namatubhyam te pushjehu vershashna arya brahmanucha nama granantiyete. No matter what type of family one is born in, if one is understood to have taken shelter of Krishna's holy name, then even if he's born in a family of swapacha, dog eaters, then still he's considered a Brahmin by taking shelter of the holy name. So, because the actual word Brahmin means one who knows Brahman. So, by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's actions, he was showing this and establishing this. And to this day, sometimes people object not to what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did, but what Prabhupada did is giving Westerners Brahminical initiation, sannyas, engaging ladies in deity worship. Prabhupada was a revolutionary, like his spiritual master. Prabhupada made his life and soul following the order of his guru to preach in English, and that's the order that Prabhupada got in 1924 in Calcutta. And Prabhupada meditated on that order for his whole life. Okay. So this attack was actually perpetrated by the caste Goswamis. In other words, those who consider themselves to be Goswamis because of their caste or their family name. And what happened was there was a big protest after this occasion of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples getting attacked. And even the chief police inspector was sacked. That means they got rid of him. And the parikrama continued under complete police protection. And this news, or the devotees getting attacked, brought the sympathy of the or people in general, and people started to be interested in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's movement. So this is an amazing preaching feat. Sometimes Prabhupada himself was very happy when people criticized us, as long as they mentioned the holy name enough times and they made us more famous. So, here's more stories. Then there's a story when the governor of Bengal, Sir John Anderson, visited Mayapur. Arrangements were made for receiving him and his whole party, and they were made by a Calcutta hotel, which by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's order, meat was supplied and everything else according to British taste. Now, that's amazing. So there's an interesting quote. When Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was questioned about this, how can you do such a thing? And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because he was doing something to make the Britishers more comfortable, so gradually they could be introduced to Krishna consciousness. Of course, we don't have that prerogative of, feeding people meat, so they'll be gradually introduced. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur commented when his disciples who went to London said that people don't want to follow the four regulative principles, and he said you should feed them meat. Now, we don't do that. We don't have to do that. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was willing to take any risk in preaching. In fact, there's this famous quote of his when he was questioned by one of his disciples about this offering meat to the Britishers, he said, I decided to do all these things thousands of births ago. We have to do anything and everything for serving Mahaprabhu. And one time a German scholar came to visit Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he arranged cigarettes for him so the scholar would feel comfortable. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And also, when there were temples being built, at least one of the temples that was being built under the supervision of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, probably the temple in Mayapur, the workers just were addicted to cigarettes. And there's some description that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur arranged for the cigarettes, which weren't actually cigarettes, which were roll your own type of stuff, to be rolled for these particular personalities who are working on the temple. Because sometimes you have these Shudras who just can't avoid sinful activities, and if you just prohibit them from performing any sort of sinful activity while they're trying to build a temple, they won't build the temple. They won't be interested in building a temple. Okay, then he was actually the first Vaishnava to utilize the radio for preaching Krishna consciousness. And they broadcast his disciples, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples, broadcast a lecture and also a kirtan accompanied by traditional instruments and a piano. Woo! Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur arranged like slideshows. At that time, there wasn't electricity everywhere, so they used something called magic lanterns. That means crude slideshows using, I guess, like some sort of light from oil or something like that, and projected through some sort of screen, whatever. So when he was publishing his English magazine called The Harmonist, another example of his reaching out to the modern world and being relevant, in 1935, for example, The Harmonist had articles entitled with things like Gaudiya Math and Politics, Gaudiya Math and the Caste System, Gaudiya Math and History, Gaudiya Math and Eugenics. Wow. If you don't know what eugenics are, that was a very popular topic at that time in 1935. Eugenics means breeding people, basically. And that's a topic that Hitler was very much interested in, and to breed what he called the master race. And other articles were entitled Gaudiya Math and Law, Gaudiya Math and Trade and Commerce, and Gaudiya Math and Science. He arranged for a boat. The Gaudiya Math had a boat that would travel from present-day Kulia, which is where all the offenses were forgiven when Lord Chaitanya was present, to Mayapur. And if he was so much interested in preaching that if the road was muddy, when visitors were coming, he would have straw strewn on the road, and he would send a horse cart or a car to bring them to the Math, the Gaudiya Math and Sridhar Mayapur. So in other words, preaching is the essence, purity is the force, books are the basis, right? Utility is the principle. Those are the four things that Prabhupada mentioned that guided his presentation of Krishna consciousness. Preaching is the essence. Of course, in order to preach, one has to have the purity. So that's why purity is the force. How does one get the purity? By chanting purely with great attention, following the proper sadhana, serving the Vaishnavas, not committing offense or offenses, and living a very pure lifestyle. Eating food only cooked by devotees, because if you eat food cooked by non-devotees, your mind becomes a little wicked. So anyway, Uh, so he established the importance of Sridham Mayapur and actually arranged for the first uh, post office to be set up there. Uh, and he arranged for Mayapur Parikrama and attracting people to Sridham Mayapur. And gradually more and more people came to Mayapur, which, first of all, caused the loss of prestige to the Mayapur so-called Goswamis, the ritualistic Brahmanas, because he wanted to attract the public to Mayapur and to show them that Mayapur was non-different from Vrindavan, which is true. It's called Gupta Vrindavan. That means hidden Vrindavan, a Vrindavan that's not known to be Vrindavan by most of the populace. So, uh, but at the same time, he didn't want Vrindavan or Mayapur to be accessed so easily. So he vetoed the construction of a bridge over the Ganga, not Ganga, sorry, the Ganga, and he vetoed the planned laying of a branch railway line. He says, don't increase the weight of the holy Dham by bringing materialistic people here to pass stool. So other than during festivals, this is really interesting, because other than the festival time, he wanted the pristine environment to be preserved so the devotees could do bhajan, and only devotees serious about bhajan and seva would be able to reside in the holy Dham. And he was so determined to establish this that he instructed one of his disciples, who named Narahari Prabhu, that anybody who was living in the Gaudiya Math, who was inclined to sense indulgence, be transferred to the Gaudiya Math in Bombay. Because Bombay is a city of sense enjoyment, and anyone who was disturbed by the heat in the Holy Dham should be sent to Darjeeling, where the atmosphere was very pleasing and cool. So he also further established, according to his father's discovery of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance place, that the actual appearance place of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was in Sridham Mayapur rather than in Kulia. So he wanted to attract them to come to Sridham Mayapur rather than Kulia, so he hired professional theatrical groups to perform popular religious plays, such as the Harish Chandra play and the Nimai Sannyas play. So in other words, he hired people just to attract the crowds to come during the festival times. But he actually forbade his disciples from watching these dramas, because they were done by professionals. Of course, even the Nimai Sannyas pastime is a transcendental pastime, and Harish Chandra's story is actually there from the Vedic literatures. But he abhorred utilizing professional actors, but did that just to attract people to Sridham Mayapur. So his most innovative preaching strategy was establishing diorama displays based upon scriptural themes. He called these theistic exhibitions, and one of the words used for that is pradarshanies. And they required so much organization and months of planning and collection of huge funds. And between 1928 and 1936, he had a total of 10 such exhibitions. And millions and millions of people came. In 1928 at Kurukshetra, he established a festival because crowds were expected on the occasion of the solar eclipse. And of course, that's where the residents of Vrindavan met Krishna and established many exhibits depicting Krishna and his friends coming to Kurukshetra from Dwarka, and the Brajabasis arriving from Vrindavan to meet Krishna. He had 20,000 handbills printed and circulated, inviting everyone to the exhibition. And there's so many people came that he became enthused to plan an extraordinary, elaborate exhibition for Mayapur, which was inaugurated in February 1930 and continued into 17th March, the day of Gaur Purnima. So, let's see, the exposition was divided, I'm just reading, into two sections, spiritual and secular, with items collected from every part of India, and the whole extravaganza covered more than 1 square mile. The secular division demonstrated miscellaneous departments of human endeavor, medical, educational, agricultural, arts and crafts, cattle and livestock, child welfare, it sounds like a state fair, athletics and amusement. Several provincial governments sent materials to be displayed. Others were attractions of performances of athletic feats such as gymnastics, wrestling, boxing, sword and stick play, and jiu-jitsu. There were musical competitions, dramas, film shows, a circus, and in the words of the harmonist, all other varieties of innocent amusements. Prizes, medals, and certificates were awarded to deserving exhibitors and performers. Now that's quite an innovation, isn't it? A lot of mundane things. I mean, gymnastics is not exactly spiritual, unless you have the gymnastic of Jarasandha fighting Bhimsen, then it's actually quite interesting. Boxing, sword fighting, jiu-jitsu, wrestling. And so this was done to attract people. In other words, sometimes you have to do something mundane. So sometimes nowadays people complain that we are using yoga to attract people, right? He said, you shouldn't use yoga. You should just tell people plain out they're in Maya. They're not the body. And they should surrender and shave all their hair off and become full-time devotees. No. The point is, you have to attract people. And he told this very interesting story about how to keep people and attract people. And this is the story of Balab rice with ghee on it. So, once upon a time, this is a story told by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Once upon a time, there was a man who really couldn't keep a servant. I guess he was too tough with his servants. Servant kept running away. He wasn't a slave, just a servant, so he had the ability and the right to run away at any time. So he couldn't keep a servant, and he went to his friend, and, what am I going to do? I can't keep servants, no good people today. And so his friend said, just give them balam rice, which is like basmati rice, with some ghee on it for about 2 weeks. Not forever, but 2 weeks. And once you give them that, they'll never forget the taste of balam rice, and even if they leave, they'll come right back. So he did that, and that's what happened. He had a servant, left, came back, left, came back, and so he never lost his servant after that particular point. So the point is, one has to actually give people sometimes a little bit of sense gratification and let them see the Krishna consciousness is not some fanatic thing meant for brahmacharis and sannyasis. Sometimes we present Krishna consciousness in such a fanatic way that the only people who are attracted are basically either completely renounced persons anyway, who are already almost pure devotees, or crazy people. So Krishna consciousness can allow, Krishna says, 4 types of people come to me, and the Bhagavatam it says, Akama Sarvakama Moksha Kamadaradi Tivrena Bhakti Yogani Yajeta Purusham Param. So sometimes you have to give people, some sense. And everybody needs some sense gratification just to survive. Everybody needs a different type of sense gratification, or a different amount of sense gratification. But it's necessary, and we have different needs. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood this, and he employed wrestlers and jugglers And boxers, can you imagine boxers going to a theistic exhibition and seeing boxers? So, of course, that was one side of the theistic exhibition, what he called innocent amusements and actually prizes, just like a state fair. And then there was the spiritual side, where there were figures of Vishnu and Krishna and memorabilia that was used by great sadhus, book displays in different languages, rare unpublished religious works, and photos and paintings of sadhus in many sacred places. And there was a huge map of India, accompanying over a third of an acre, constructed on the ground with stone, cement, brick, and mortar, showing prominent holy places, locations of all the Gaudiya Math branches, and the routes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda's tours. Dioramas there were over 50 dioramas depicting many pastimes and religious practices in India, with the emphasis on Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. There were also displays of the practices of pseudo-Vaishnavas, other religious sects, and there were backgrounds painted, appropriate scenes, and there were many incidents of the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that were displayed, and the entire grounds were illuminated by electricity. And that was remarkable at that particular time, because recently they'd installed electricity. So an amazing arrangement. People came from all over Bengal and actually all over India, and they were overwhelmed by seeing the true teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they received many requests to do the same exhibition in different parts of India. So from 1918, when he accepted sannyas and started preaching in a systematic manner, till 1937, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur enhanced Mayapur by building two major temples, one at the Sri Chaitanya Math, which is sort of at the end of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Marg, or the road which he established. Prabhupada was very intelligent when describing that road. Of course, Prabhupada was always very intelligent. One year there was flooding in Mayapur, and that road protected our property, and Prabhupada said, but the road of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and of course meaning the path of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, always protects us. So he had one temple at the Chaitanya Math, which is at the end of the road, and the other one was at the Yoga Pit, that means the place where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appeared, and also constructed many other small temples, gardens, shrines, educational institutions, libraries, and made arrangements for electricity and telephone connections, even though most of India did not have those particular connections at that particular time. So, as I mentioned before, he introduced glorious festivals as a primary feature of the Gaudiya Math temple. And even in Calcutta, sometimes tens of thousands of people were fed in a single day. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wanted that every major Vaishnava festival would be grandly observed in every branch of the Gaudiya Math. And he introduced even some special celebrations, special events, and he created a constant gala mood whereby Math inmates, that means people lived in the Math, and local grahastas were either busy conducting a festival or preparing for the next festival. There's one festival after another: kirtan, darshan, hari katha, distribution of mahaprasadam, and it became an important part of social life of the local people because of the efforts of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Another invention was the Gaudiya Math also had a horse, a buggy, an elephant, and a camel. And so the camel was purchased after Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saw one in Patna and said, Such a creature should be engaged in Lord Chaitanya's service. And there were decorated horses and elephants. The Gaudiya Math's horses were so strong that it was rumored that they were fed Malpuras all the time. So regularly, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would lead groups of pilgrimage on the 168-mile parikrama around Mayapur. And this is the most prominent parikrama. They carried a deity of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu atop an elephant named Kirtan Das. And they were accompanied by a horse and a police band. And they had 6 camels purchased to carry the heavy loads. 2 Gaudiya Math cars sent from Calcutta by train. I guess the roads weren't so good there. And they had pilgrims carrying flags and chanting in kirtan. And each evening a small township of almost 100 large tents was arranged in a semicircle, within which each group of pilgrims was assigned to a specific section for the night. In the center were tents for the deity, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, sannyasis, and other leading devotees. And they had kirtan all night, harikatha, cooking, and honoring of Mahaprasadam. And guards, of course, were posted to get rid of the dacoits, because in India, there's dacoits. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur made concessions who were not used to such austerities. For instance, it is enjoined that parikrama be performed, especially in Brajmandal, barefoot, because the paths of Brajmandal were full of thorns. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur allowed the use of rubber-bottomed canvas shoes. Also, he allowed tea drinking during the parikrama, because many people were habituated. But he also forbade participants from taking fruit or flowers from the trees or twigs to be used as toothbrushes, because he explained everything in Braj is meant for Krishna's enjoyment. The trees in Braj are rishis and munis. Don't disturb them. He chastised some brahmacharis after being informed that they had broken up twigs at rasa stali to use as toothbrushes. So this is some of the information or some of the stories of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. I think the most important thing for us is his primary disciples, Srila Prabhupada's, carrying out Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mission and being focused on the instructions he got from his Guru Maharaj. So, as I mentioned in the beginning of this whole discussion, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was known as Nrsimha Guru because he was very tough on the Mayavadis and impersonalists. And so, therefore, Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, wrote in his offering to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the Vyas Puja offering, a very interesting stanza. He said, "Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved, and personal calamity thou hast moved." Now when, short statement like that, along with some other words, but that particular stanza impressed Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur so much that he said to his devotees who were in charge of publication that whatever Abhay Charan, that's Prabhupada, writes, you should publish. Because this one statement sort of summarized Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mission. Absolute is sentient. In other words, the Supreme Absolute Truth is personal. Thou hast proved. Thou hast proved, in other words, you've established it through Vedic reference and logic and reasoning. Impersonal calamity, very interesting, thou hast moved. Impersonalism is a calamity, as Prabhupada Saraswati Thakur states. Kaivalya Narakayate, actually merging into the absolute, or impersonalism is like going to hell. Why is it like going to hell? Because there's no activities, no relationships, no possibility of any ananda or bliss. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mission was pretty much summed up, of course, spreading that particular message that God has a personality, an internal personality, internal activities, eternal relationships, eternal existence. He's omniscient, omnipotent. Everything is contained within that one stanza written by Srila Prabhupada. And therefore, when we pray to Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, we pray Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharni Nirashesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dejatarni. That our dear servant, or the dear servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharani. You are preaching the message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in doing so, Nirashesha Shunyavadi, you are dealing and attacking in the same mood as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the impersonalists and voidists. Shunyavadi means voidist, something like the misunderstanding the people have of Buddhism. Nirashesha, Nirashesha means there's no difference or no categories, everything is one. No distinction. Nirvishesha. Shunyavadi. Paschatya. What? Dejatarni. That means in the Western world. So that was actually the mission that Srila Prabhupada was given by his spiritual master. Go to the Western world and preach against this impersonalism and voidism. And to this day, we're encountering so many people who are influenced by impersonalism and voidism in the Western world. And in many cases, it's not just coming from the Western world, it's coming from India. And I would say maybe even a majority of cases, this impersonalism is coming from India. We have to deal with this quite a bit, where people follow people even who are in Vrindavan but who are impersonalists, who say that ultimately crazy things like when Hanuman is with Ram, he becomes Ram. Such an offensive statement. And these sorts of offensive statements made Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur very angry, as we mentioned before, when he picked up someone by the scruff of his shirt. So we have to have that mood of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, perhaps not do the same thing, picking up people by their shirt, but have that fighting mood. Now, God is a person, and we have a personal relationship with him. So if we are actually servants of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and certainly Srila Prabhupada, our Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, exhibited that mood. Whenever he was dealing with those who were impersonalists or voidists, that's when he manifested the greatest anger. Now, normally a devotee doesn't exhibit anger, but when there's someone who is attacking, just like if someone attacks or criticizes someone whom you love, and you just sit back and you just like smile or take it or don't run away, you're a rascal. Because if you love someone, and people would criticize Prabhupada, our Prabhupada, for getting angry when someone came up with some bogus philosophy. In fact, there was one Pandel program where Prabhupada was invited, and some impersonalist was speaking some garbage. And what did Prabhupada do? Prabhupada told the devotees, get up on the stage and start chanting Hare Krishna and drown this guy out. So that's the mood of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Nirashesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dejatarne. So, anyway, we can take a few questions. We have a minute or two to take questions. Give me a second. Let me unmute you all. Participantes. Okay. You're unmuted. So who has a question or comment they'd like to make? No one. Oh, let me put up the chat window so I can. So you can chat, unmute yourself, or raise your hand. Okay, spoons. What is this? Ooh. Hi, Krishna Gordane. My brother hates Lord Krishna and all his incarnations, which is ISKCON devotees worship like Gauranatai, Lord Jagannath, and Sringadev. I have a few utensils which are separate from his utensils because he cooks and eats onions with those utensils. But the trouble me, he one by one takes my utensils for his use, so that I have no option left than to reject that utensil. Sometimes I feel like I should survive on fruits, so I don't have to use those plates, spoons, etc. How to deal with the situation when people from my home are causing trouble in my spiritual path? Don't talk to them about it. Just keep it to yourself, your spiritual life to yourself. That's all. It's your private life. You're not supposed to reveal your worshipable deity, your mantra, or anything to people who are offensive. I discovered that very early on in my spiritual path. When I first started Krishna consciousness, I thought I would preach to my parents, who got extremely angry when I started to preach to them. So after that, I just acted like an ordinary materialist. And that's the same advice that Lord Chaitanya gave Raghunath Das Goswami. Don't act to cause anyone to be suspicious that you're a spiritualist. And ultimately make some plans so you don't have to be in such a situation. I mean, it's not that you have to live in that situation for the rest of your life. At a certain point, you want to stay with me, or if I want to stay with you, I'm not going to tolerate it. But at this particular point, it sounds like you're stuck. So because you're stuck in such a situation, the best thing is don't even talk about Krishna with these people. Don't even talk about Krishna. And, using your spoons and plates, just wash them afterwards. Sometimes you just gotta deal with it and wash it. But don't talk to them at all. Because these people are envious of Krishna. They have some deep-seated envy. So, who else has a question or a comment?
Hare Krishna, Dandot Maharaj. Dandot Pranam Maharaj.
Haribol.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm sorry, it's a hard thing to ask this question, but I hope, it's very difficult. But anyway, I like to ask, and I ask you all kinds of things. And this one is a little, I've never dared to ask this kind of thing, but when you were reading all these pastimes, wonderful of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, powerful preaching, and so many things, marvelous, phenomenal. But one thing, I don't know how we understand in that area, especially which became East Bengal, and a lot of Muslim population grew, and also like Christian preaching, a lot of people became Christian, and that whole Bengal became communist dominated area. In spite of all that powerful preaching, how to understand this? So much Islamic people with that kind of thinking grew, and Christians powerful, Mother Teresa, and so many things. When I see and communists, they were dominant for a long time in spite of this powerful preaching. How do we understand this?
That's a very interesting question. There's so much Christian conversion, and of course the Muslims, well, they forcibly converted. Even during the time of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, not only during the time of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. You can take it that everybody in this world gets the results of their desires. So if someone desires to forget Krishna, and I'm not speaking about any particular religion right now or political scheme like communism or whatever, but if one desires to forget Krishna, then Krishna will give them facility to forget. So Krishna is reciprocating with each and every person's desires. So, I mean, if someone is actually desiring to know God, just like, I was born in America and I desired to know God, I was praying to God to let me know Him, then Krishna sent Prabhupada just in America. So there's the opposite, sort of like example where I was born in America and nobody knew about Krishna, and somehow or other I came in contact and became Krishna conscious because of my desire. So wherever you are, there are people with desires. And Krishna also says in the Gita that, Manushanam sahasreshu kastid yatati siddhye yatatam api siddhanam kastyan mam veti tadvata. Out of many, many people who are looking for perfection, perhaps one will take up Krishna consciousness, and out of millions of those, perhaps one will know him in truth. So it is a very rare thing to find someone who is Krishna conscious. And so that's one answer that I would give to that. That wherever you are, everybody is an individual and has their individual desires, and Krishna is reciprocating with those individual desires. I mean, not only the Muslim religion, not only the Christian religion, but even the desire for political freedom, Swaraj, like that. And I'm not criticizing. I mean, some of them are actually even materially desirable. At the same time, they're not spiritual. So Christian does reciprocate with people's material desires. Uh, Ishwara Sarvabhutanam Radesha Arjuna Tishti Brahmayan Sarvabhutani Yantra Rudani Maya. Krishna's in the heart and he's directing everybody's wandering. So anybody like Haridas Thakur is a Muslim family, became a Muslim, became a great pure devotee of Krishna. So it's all dependent upon desires. That's my answer to the
Thank you.
question. All right?
Thank you, Maharaj. Dandavat.
Haribo. And so, Gopal, this final one, you have a question?
I just one comment, Gurudev, that I'd heard in a class in Mayapur many years ago. I think it was Jai Patak Maharaj. He mentioned that Bengal, although some of the most wonderful personalities have appeared there, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Advaitacharya, everyone, they've struggled even since antiquity to maintain a strong leadership to protect the citizens from nonsensical things. Like even from the Mahabharata, the example was given in the class. In the Mahabharata 5,000 years ago, Bhima had to kill that Rakshasa in Ekachakra because the king wasn't strong enough to protect the citizens. So that example was given that Bengal has always struggled like that.
Yeah, actually, it mentions that generally the Bengalis, they're not very strong physically. They're not like Punjabis. So,
Yeah. And the example was given in the class physically and mentally. Also, they're easily manipulated or influenced in that way. That was
well,
also
actually, Bengali, Prabhupada actually said the Bengalis tend to be more intelligent.
sentiment. Oh,
Well, Prabhupada said more intelligent. Actually, Prabhupada said more intelligent. So the greatest philosophers, such as Jiva Goswami, came from Bengal. So that was Prabhupada's statement about
yeah.
Bengalis. But they are much weaker physically, so the general mass of people can be exploited more easily because you don't have a Kshatriya class who can basically make sure that the truth and justice and the American way, no, truth, justice, and philosophical integrity are maintained. Whereas in other states of India, you have a real Kshatriya class if you go into Punjab like that, or Rajasthan. So look at Rajasthan. I mean, really, because they have very strong kings, so basically things have been maintained Krishna conscious wise and much better than in Bengal.
Yeah.
Okay, on that
Thank you,
happy
Gurudev.
note, we will end class, and tomorrow we'll continue with the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Thank you all for joining us. All glory.